Natasha, and thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you being here, and I am really looking forward to this one because not often do I can't remember doing a video on this topic, and I want to show you a couple of things about mini ink pads or ink cubes, or whatever design you've got. Here's a few different ones. I don't have many. I don't have a whole lot of storage space, so I just don't have the space to store normal sized ink pads and smaller. Now, what I do have is a select little few of the small ink pads. Now, these ones here that I'm going to use today are the Simon Says Stamp Red Earth. These are part of Stamptember, and there is sort of a browns, and then there are reds. Now, there's sort of 3 of each. Always have a bit of a swatch, see which colours, remind yourself what the colours look like, or look up some swatches to see what they are going to look like together. These are the browns. I'm going to go with the reds for this one. This is the Punch, Sangria and Cabernet, and this is going to be the Positively Saturated inks. So these are dye inks, they are fade resistant, they are water reactive, but we're going to use them like this, just as the little mini ink cubes. Now, this video today is specifically about mini ink pads or ink cubes, and these techniques are going to be harder to do with a full-sized ink pad. And this is honestly one of the most simple techniques, and yet this is probably one of my favorite cards. This is like my go-to when I don't have any inspiration. I don't want it to be like a specific theme, I guess, and then this just works every time. So this is my absolute go-to if I've got kind of nothing in the tank. So you just do these little, little burnouts, little half corners, little, swipes with the ink pad. And I try and make sure most of them sort of are turning just to give them some interest. Go on top of each other. I start from lightest ink to darkest, but, it doesn't really matter. I trim this down just a fraction just because I know that I want a border to go on my card base, which will be 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. But this is also like if you went a little bit heavy with the ink pad, or you caught the edge and some extra ink came off, we can trim it off to make it work there. Now, I just keep going. I usually make several of these. I don't usually just do one at a time, and often these are the backgrounds that I will happily store and stash, because, as I said, they're so versatile and they can be for anyone and any occasion. Now, these the ink pad is a foam pad, and I do find that it works very well for this technique, but absolutely some of the felt pads work really nicely too. Your ink pads do have to be mediumly juicy. I wouldn't say dry ink pads. They definitely give a different look. Now, that look might be something you're going for, but if it's not, try using your re-inker and inking it up a bit more, and that could also really help with just getting that right sort of, brush stroke almost look. Now, once I've got a couple of these, I'm just going to carry on because you can see where we're going from here. I want something to sort of contrast really nicely and catch our eye. So I'm going to use a stacking die set, the rectangle one, and I want to cut this right out of the center. I'm going to use a little bit of mint tape, which is just a low tack tape. It is a great one that never, ever, ever, I don't think I've ever had it rip my paper ever. I tried out many of these. I purchased them all, and I really did like this one the best. And so I'm going to use, for that little bit of eye-catching, I'm going to use the Concord 9th Matte Gold. Now, I prefer the matte gold and matte silver, and I think they also have a rose gold. I prefer that over the mirror cardstock. That's really just a personal preference thing though, for sure. So once I have a rectangle cut out, then I have my matting layer of the gold cardstock. We need to work on the sentiments to go in the middle. Now, we do have quite a plain-ish kind of background, so we do want to make sure that this has a bit of, va-va-voom. So I'm going to use the Fancy You die from Simon Says Stamp. It's just you with a shadow, and obviously it's the fancy version. There is a couple of versions that they have, and then I wanted Are Amazing, so I went with the Simply Sentiments Thank You set, and this one just happened to have the Are Amazing. It says You Are Amazing, actually, and then when I go to stamp this this out on some plain white cardstock. I'm stamping it in some VersaFine Onyx Black because it's a beautiful, crisp pigment stamping ink. And then I stamp out the "You Are Amazing." Now, I laugh at myself when I'm editing this because obviously I already have the word "you," and so I was meant to blank off the part that says "You Are Amazing" because I don't need the word twice. But yeah, no, I just went along with it and I cut out the whole sentiment, and that's fine. Now, I don't need to add any more colour or introduce new colours, so I'm just putting this on a plain white shadow. So I cut the shadow out in white, and then I have the "You" in the gold. Now, I actually used my matting layer that I'm going to use for the gold. I actually die cut out of the centre of that. Again, nobody's going to notice, nobody's going to see it, and it makes good use of the cardstock that we're going to have otherwise hidden. I used some art glitter glue, pop this on the shadow version, on the shadow background, and then that is that part ready to go. I used some more glue to go over top, and this is going to layer up nicely. It dries very fast, this glue. It really only gives you 1 or 2 seconds to shift it around. And then I will put this back down on my border layer. Now, if you don't want them to match up, then you can put them, turn it upside down at this point. I like the look of the continuous look there, where you can see like the brush strokes, they meet up exactly where they were. Now, another way to do this again is to actually just cut a very thin gold frame, and you could add that on. That would save the other die cutting, but I just find this way a lot less frustrating because you don't have to work with the really sort of delicate, flimsy gold frame. I find this way, just easier. But both ways work perfectly, and they both look gorgeous. I add foam tape to the back of this panel, and then this is going to go down on a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base. I like the side folding cards, and I make my own out of the 110 pound cardstock. It is the Frenchville brand from Spotlight here in New Zealand. I finally noticed that I have the word "you" on the "Are Amazing," and so I did manage to just be able to cut it off. If I did it on an angle, then you wouldn't notice. So I've angled both ends of the "Are Amazing," and I managed to snip off the "you" without, having to re-stamp it out. No big deal, but I was just laughing at myself that, no, I didn't catch that. But anyway, I have just in time. This is going to go right pretty much in the center. So just really, the focal point here. This card is shiny, it is bright, it has color. I really love this card in person. Now, I did want to show you a couple of different ways that we are able to use the cubed or the smaller or the mini ink cubes, and so for this one I'm going to be using a different one. These are actually all the mini cubes that I have, so my choices were limited. I had to think about what I was able to do, but these trees are going to work well. Now, this is called Canopy by Penny Black. I want to do one tree that I'm able to repeat stamp. Now, for this I am going to use a stamping platform. It's not absolutely essential, but it definitely makes life a lot easier because there are a couple of different ways, of course, that you are able to do this. Again, one way without a positioner, and the other way, is just easier with. I'll show you them both here. I'm going to line this up. I have the sticky grid. I think it's the Altenew one, which is actually meant for the stamp wheel. However, I cut it down and it fits in my normal stamping platforms, and I absolutely love it. These have lasted better for me than previous ones I have used, but products are always evolving. There's always new things out there, so if you have a stash of whatever works for you, then that is, go for gold. Absolutely make sure you use them up. Don't just change because you saw a good idea. But if you don't have one and you're looking for a stamp mat, then these ones are great. Now, here is the first technique. So if you don't have a stamping platform and you just want to get this ombre look, now it is not impossible to do this with large ink pads. It is just easier. If you're doing it without a stamping platform, then you want to do all 3 colors in one. Now, that's what I did for the first one, and you can see the blend is beautiful. You want to make sure you've got a light, a medium, and a dark of, pretty similar colors. For example, you wouldn't go from a purple to a yellow. That would be a trickier transition just on a stamp with no stamping platform. It would be easier with a stamping platform. This is the second way of doing it here. If you have a stamping platform and you have the ability to open and close the lid and re-stamp, And if you only have larger ink pads, like the normal sized ink pads, then this technique is definitely easier, because what you can do is put the color down, you know, like say for the very bottom or in the middle is even trickier. And then you can always use a little damp cloth or a little paper towel and just, you know, press down and gently make the edges a little less harsh, a little more subtle, and then stamp it closed, open it up, add the next color down. So like I'm doing here, one color at a time. This is much easier because obviously they are light to dark of the same or a similar color. This happens to be Dew, Mist and Raindrop. Now I did want to show you the other colors in this set here. This is the Blue Lagoons set. I did it in the greens as well, so cabbage, artichoke and kale of the Positively saturated inks. They stamp beautifully and very crisp, I will say. So I really enjoyed using these, and what I'm going to do is, again, this design and using this sort of technique is so versatile, and that's what I'm looking for in my card making. I am able to use this for any occasion, and sometimes we come across those people who are hard to hard to make a specific card for, or you're not sure what they're into, you don't know them well, or there's always lots of reasons as to why we don't, specifically know what interests they have, or, what to make them. And so cards like this are brilliant. And it's not, butterflies, and it's not love hearts, and it's not, it can be quite versatile. So I have cut this out with a rectangle die just to even it up a little bit more, because my spacing was not perfect. I don't like measuring, and that is part of the reason why the mat helps me. Now this is the big thanks from Gina K, and I've taken a scrap piece of white. Bear in mind that scrap does not also mean like I would put it in the scrap bin. It just means it's an unusual piece of paper, usually that I've chopped into, and it's just, what's left. So usually they're all a good size that I can keep using. I've stamped it in some VersaFine Onyx black ink. I stamped it near the bottom so that I can trim this and just have a tiny border on the bottom and a tiny border up the top. I'm using the Spellbinders Guillotine trimmer, which I'm absolutely loving. I'm using some mint tape to mask this off, because instead of adding a matting layer, I'm going to do my usual trick where I just use some ink to create a border here. So this is going to be the artichoke color. It's the middle green color, and I'm just going to put that up the top and down the bottom. This just creates a really fine skinny line. I'm only using the ink pad because it's going to match the colors. If you have an alcohol marker or something that is going to be the same color, then by all means you can just add the mint tape and then use your marker. It works really well instead of having to add an entire other layer of cardstock, and it just makes my card making a little less bulky. But by all means, if you want to add another layer, that's going to work perfectly too. And then this is longer than I need at the moment, so I know that I want to be able to trim this down. And again, instead of adding an extra layer, I'm going to do this trick here as well. And the reason for that is that the trees are pretty big, they take up a good portion of the card front, and so I was not able to cut this panel down, the front panel, too small, and so there's not that much room between the size of my card panel and my card base, and so I just need a very, very thin little layer that I did that to as well. I trimmed down my sentiment here across the front, added a piece of foam tape to the back. I've added the inking down the sides of my front sentiment as well, so it just sinks right into that background there, and then this will go directly onto my card base. Now these two cards are super simple, super versatile. You absolutely can do this with any stamps that you have in your stash, and it is handy to have even just a few, even just a handful of little ink cubes on hand. I'd love to know what the main uses that you have for mini ink cubes or smaller ink pads, and what you use them for in your stash, but these are just a few that I love, my absolute go-tos. That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.